Hi everyone, this is Ellen from Astrology Journal. We had a full moon this morning, a Leo full moon at 8:53 Eastern Time. So the moon is in Leo, the sun is in Aquarius. There is a T-square involving the sun and moon with Uranus at the tip, and there is a grand trine involving, if we include Sedna, involving Sedna, the South Node, and Pluto. And then there is this keen decile between Pluto and Mars. So I'll start with the keen decile. So I've talked about this a lot. It's this idea of pressure, and I believe it. For me, the way that I've been reading it, something's wanting to be birthed. It's about the pressure of birth that comes with the birth process. And Mars has been going retrograde back and forth over in opposition to Pluto, but right now it's in this keen decile, 165 degrees. So there's this idea of pressure. It's in Cancer, so it's definitely emphasizing this idea of birth. And the way that I think about retrogrades is this idea of a developmental hesitation where we've reached a new point in our journey, and before we sort of launch into that new part of the journey, we retreat a little bit to gather ourselves, perhaps to go back to something that gives us strength or something we need to resolve. And then we do all that work, we get that strength or resolve what we need to resolve, and we go back forward, and then we're ready, we can make that leap to the new developmental part of the journey that we're on. Or we can think of it as preparing for something new to be birthed, which really when we think about development, it's like some new part of us is wanting to be birthed. We can almost think of each developmental stage as a sort of a metamorphic process where we were one thing in one moment, and then somehow something happens and changes and we're another thing. In another part of the process, if you think about the transition from childhood from latency to adolescence, we can kind of understand that metamorphic process, and perhaps it's a little, there's a little bit of that going on in each developmental stage. So that's just an idea that I'm playing with. But Mars is in Cancer, so it's this idea of something's wanting to be birthed, and it's in process. It's not ready yet. Where there's some inner work, there's just the reality of the creative process. It takes time, and it's not yet ready. We may be feeling uncomfortable. We may be like, let's just get this out, something like that. We may not yet know exactly what it is. But there is this idea of this birth process, and there is a kind of a pressure that comes with that, perhaps a kind of intensity, especially with Pluto involved, a kind of intensity with that. Mars enacts, in evolutionary astrology as taught by Jeff Green, Mars is said to enact the desires of the soul. So the soul is represented by Pluto. It is our desire nature. That is what the soul, I guess, is. And Mars enacts those desires. So this, whatever it is that's being birthed, perhaps we can think of as it's bigger than just our egos. Cancer representing ego. And I don't mean ego in a negative way. I just mean ego as an individualizing kind of a filter. And so it's a bigger than that in some way. It's deep, maybe not bigger, deeper than that in some way. It's just much deeper than that. I guess I'm just repeating myself there. But anyway, so that's just something to think about. So in terms of this idea of maybe we don't know what it is, perhaps because it's just so deep. We may not fully understand it until it's birthed, something like that. But we may know too. So anyway, so that is the keen decile. So the moon is in Leo, but interestingly, this chart to me feels more about Aquarius, because we have the sun in Aquarius. I mean, the sun is always going to be opposite wherever the full moon is, but it's in Aquarius. In this case, it's in Aquarius. And then there's also Pluto in Aquarius, there's Mercury in Aquarius, and there's Ceres in Aquarius. And then there's that T-square that's involving the sun and the moon, and that's point, the focal point is Uranus, and Uranus rules Aquarius. So there's a lot of Aquarian energy. So it's almost like perhaps we need to bring somehow we need to balance out this creative expression with this Aquarian energy. And part of that might be we need to figure out how to individualize that creative expression if we're out of alignment with our creative expression and instead are doing sort of creating according to what other people are expecting from us, perhaps there needs to be some adjustment back so that more of us can shine through whatever it is we're creating. Perhaps the adjustment or perhaps the rebalancing has to do with it's been too much about us. It's been too me-centered, and perhaps more of the community. There has to be, a sense of more of the community element. We're being called to recognize that relationship between us and the community. And by the way, there's Andre Agassi, the former tennis star, or he was a tennis star. His farewell address, I always think of that as expressing this relationship between Leo and Aquarius. There's interestingly no Leo in his chart except that he has a sun. His sun is in Taurus. The exact time of his birth isn't known. In the noon chart, his moon is in Aquarius, but I'm not sure if the moon was in Aquarius all day, so it's possible his moon wasn't in Aquarius when he was born. But it's interesting because if you listen to that speech, I'll find it and put a link to it. It's very emotional, but there's one point where he says, "And I found you." And there was a sense of he understood this sort of relationship between, his light and giving his light and receiving back. And that was that was a lesson for him. He received back this incredible inspiration back that was kick-started by his own creative energy. And then it comes back. And then, it's sort of this cycle. You give this creative energy to the crowd, and then it comes back to you, and that inspires you more. And then you give out, and that inspires the crowd, and then they inspire you back. So perhaps there's some kind of cycle like that. And it's interesting to think about this 3-sign stretch of the zodiac: Cancer, Leo, and Virgo. And so we see Leo and Aquarius opposed. And perhaps we can say that Leo, what is Leo expressing? It's expressing the emotions, right? It's expressing the emotions as they are channeled through us, our unique Aquarius self. And then Virgo then is the next part, in service. And we could perhaps say in service to the collective. So there's this yod that forms between Cancer and Aquarius and Virgo. And then Leo is sort of at the center of that yod. And so perhaps that's how we can think about, it's hard to think about a sign individually. You sort of have to think about it in context of everything else. And that's what I'm doing here. So yeah, it's Leo and Aquarius opposed, but what else is going on? What is the bigger relationship there that can help us better understand that? So anyway, that's one way to think about it, to read about it. And then there's this T-square. Oh, and before I go to the T-square, I just want to say another really big part of this full moon, in my opinion, is Sedna. Sedna stationed direct yesterday. The day before this full moon. And for me, I had a lot of really deep old fear come up, really painful, and also an awareness that was really painful that the way that I was taught growing up, the educational system that I was raised in, Gemini school systems, actually stunted my IQ. So IQ we can think of as Aquarius, the intelligence quotients. There are all sorts of different ways of intelligence, right? But it doesn't help anybody when our school systems actually thwart, sort of stifle the development of our IQs. So anyway, that was just a huge moment that made me feel sick to my stomach, and it was on top of some other things that has old fears of mine around home and security and finances and all that sort of stuff. And it was interesting that came up with Sedna stationing direct. Gemini has to do with commerce and trade, and it's at 0 degrees of Gemini. So it's sort of like bringing in the whole Taurus theme into Gemini, and Taurus has to do with money and our gifts and our resources and that sort of thing. So that's just really interesting to me. And then the T-square itself is pointing to Uranus, which is in Taurus. So again, this idea of money and security. So all these themes were at play. And yesterday was sort of a big day where it just all sort of happened. And I think that was a good thing. It helped me get to the bottom of some things. And I just have some processing to do now. So anyway, just a little sharing about what's been going on for me, but it's one of the reasons I think Sedna is really important to consider in this full moon, just because of the experience I had yesterday leading up to this full moon, and it happened that Sedna was turning direct on that day, and the day before too it was stationing, and so that's when it was happening for me. So perhaps that was the setup for this full moon, in a way. So anyway, we have Uranus at the focal point of this T-square involving the sun and the moon. So again, it's suggesting the emphasis is more on the Aquarian archetype because of the Uranus focal point. And so bringing back into balance somehow. And Taurus is our gifts and our talents. And it is the first fixed sign, and Aquarius is the final fixed sign. And so Aquarius here is where, in Taurus is where we discover our raw materials and resources, which includes our gifts and talents. And by the time we get to Aquarius, it's about manifesting those. It's about, breaking free of the structures, that confine. So in Capricorn, what we're doing is we're mastering our gifts and talents. If Taurus is the first earth sign, Capricorn is the third, the final earth sign. So we're mastering our gifts and talents. And ideally, the structures that we're in are helping us do that. But we can enter into structures that steer us away from our own gifts and talents because they sort of prioritize, they say these things are more important. And then we master that, but we haven't mastered ourselves. Ideally, what we're wanting to do is master our gifts and talents, master our light, master us, and then step into Aquarius. Now we have matured enough that we can now step out on our own and express it and start to riff on it and start to, create the next branches and the next buds and the next whatever, the next part of the creation process. Now we're doing our own thing. Something like that. So there is, in my view, based on just the energies that I see in this chart, there is this idea of a call to rebalance, the Leonian and Aquarian energies, in whatever way that happens to be true for each of us individually. And I tend to bias towards the idea that we've been steered off our course by our current society, which may not be true for everybody. And so I tend to read that way. But it may be that you have been in the right track for you and you have been mastering that. But now it's time for you to become your own person. Perhaps that's part of the balancing that needs to happen here. So how are we expressing our light? Through what channels are we expressing our light? And are those channels the correct channels for who we are as unique individuals? So that's what I'm seeing in this chart. And again, I always like to end with, these are based on my filters, my biases, my experiences. A lot of what I see is based on my long history with healing, healing myself, not as a healer, but just me healing, on the healing path for myself. And so I read based on that perspective. Other people will read differently, and there is no right or wrong perspective. It's really just what we're all bringing to it. So find the astrologers that resonate with you, that are speaking, through filters that allow you to make sense of your life in positive, affirming ways. And hopefully this has helped in some way. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for listening. I hope there was something helpful. Take care. Bye.